I'm Bruce Fummey. Do you recognise this little known monument on a little rural side road? You probably don't. And yet it commemorates the biggest battle in medieval Scotland. Was it a battle of clans? Or was it a battle for dynastic control, or culture, or national identity? Or was it something else? Or all of these? Lots of people from the Scottish diaspora asked me to talk about the clans, and Karen Coker asked me to cover the Battle of Harlaw. So I'm going to do both by telling you about Red Harlaw, the biggest clan battle ever. And then we'll deal with the question why. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. In 1411, Donald of Islay, Lord of the Isles, raised an army and he set out from Tornish Castle by the Sound of Mull. Now, you can see the exact spot in a video that I made about a later Lord of the Isles, and I'll leave a link to that video at the end. But this huge force headed east into Rossshire. Now, Clint in the Scottish Clans podcast lists them as all the MacDonalds: Clan Ranald, Dunnaveg, Kepich, MacIans of Ardnamurchan, the MacLeods of Lewis and Dunvegan, MacLeans of Duart and Lochbuie, MacNeils of Barra and Gia, MacKinnon, Macquarie, Mackay of the Rins, MacNichol of Scorrybreck, MacEchan, MacGilvery of Mull, MacMillans of Knapdale, MacLaughlins, Lammonts, MacEwans, Macintoshes, Camerons, Gilliards, Mathesons and Rosses of Balnagowan. This was a party. They ravaged Ross, and as they swept eastwards towards the Rossshire seat of power at Dingwall, they met and defeated their Stuart supporting opponents: Clan Mackay, Clan Fraser, Mackenzies and possibly Monroes. Having swiped them aside, they pressed further south and east with intention of burning Aberdeen. They approached from this direction an army estimated to be up to 10,000 Highlanders. Now hold on. You were going to let that number pass by you without even thinking about it. But stop. This was a bigger Highland army than Bonnie Prince Charlie had at Culloden, at Falkirk, at Prestonpans. It's more than Robert the Bruce had at Bannockburn, than William Wallace had at Stirling Bridge. This was a host approaching the biggest, and as we'll see, the bloodiest battle in medieval Scotland. They made camp in this direction in the shadow of Benachie. Who would save Aberdeen from this marauding horde? From Angus, the Mearns and Buchan, Alexander Stewart, the Earl of Mar, had managed to gather between 1,000 and 2,000 men. Irvings, Leslies, Lovells, Malls, Murrays, Stirlings and Straightons. Now I know medieval battle numbers get skewed and distorted, so in truth, I'm not entirely sure if the Highland host outnumbered these men 5 to 1 or 10 to 1. But put yourself in their shoes. As you approach from this direction up from the River Uri towards this plateau on the morning of the 24th of July 1411, how confident would you be in seeing the end of that summer's day? Your one advantage was that you had armour that the Highlanders lacked. We're told that these lowland defenders of Aberdeen approached this spot in Shilterns, big round hedgehogs of men and spear, with some limited cavalry support. The Highlanders charged towards them in wedges. The chief of Clan Maclean, Red Hector of the Battles, led their right wing, Malcolm Beg Macintosh on the left, and Donald, Lord of the Isles, in the middle. They smashed into lowland Shilterns and drove the defenders back in that direction. And then the lowland cavalry tried to stem the losses by coming round and hurtling into the side of the Highland host. But after an initial impact, they were bogged down by the sheer number of Highlanders surrounding their horses. These men at arms were pulled down from their steeds and stabbed and stabbed and stabbed again. Okay, so no cavalry. But even more dead bodies to clamber over as the blood that they oozed made the ground slippery. Now it was a brutal bludgeoning and cutting that they say went on all day. It was only as darkness began to fall that the two forces disengaged. Now, you've seen how long a July day is in the north of Scotland. Can you imagine the anguish, gore and death? 900 of the 10,000 Highlanders lie dead. Their armour protection at Aberdeen's Lowland defenders meant that they've got only 600 dead. But if you only started with 1,500, then your total remaining force is just the number that they've lost. And with that, you have to face 9,000 Highlanders tomorrow. You know the battle's lost. When you die tomorrow, what happens to Aberdeen then? What happens to your family, your home? I wonder how much of the sleep you so desperately need you'll actually get. In the morning, when the Lowlanders stand to, no onslaught comes. Donald, Lord of the Isles, has retreated. Aberdeen is saved. They say many families lost every male in their house. Leslie of Balkane, just over the hill there, died with 6 of his sons. On the Highland side, Donald lost a much smaller proportion of his force, but that included both his seconds in command. Donald withdrew not just back to Inverness or Ross, but entirely. 2 armies, both of whom thought that they'd been defeated, now claimed victory. The question is, what was it all for? This biggest ever clan battle. So here's the most important bit, the why. Some have characterised it as a clash between two peoples and cultures. Normanised Lowlanders holding out against Celtic Highlander hordes. A victory akin to defeating the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. And yet, much of Aberdeenshire would have been Gaelic speaking themselves. And how does that explain the Mackays, Frasers and Mackenzies standing up against Donald at Dingwall? Others have pointed to personal and dynastic ambitions that prevailed. You see, some time back the earldom of Ross had been granted to William, Earl of Ross by David II. But through a complex series of marriages, husbands, predeceasing wives and varying allegiances of cousins, the earldom of Ross and the influence in that area had passed to the Stuarts of Albany and the uncle of the current king. Now, I'm going to make an extra video for my Patreon Whisky members to explain all that messy business. So if you want to become a Patreon member, then click the white tab up there. The people of Ross were Gaels, and the community was kin-based, clannish. Imposing an outside feudal overlord connected to the Stuart royal house would certainly cause a reaction. But if that was the case, why is it that when Donald had defeated the force of Mackays at Dingwall and then taken Ross, why did he head for Aberdeen instead of just consolidating? More to the point, why retreat entirely when it was all over and allow the Stuarts to take back control of the earldom of Ross so easily? Maybe this was nothing more than a pillaging raid in Aberdeen gone wrong. It was supposed to be a walkover, but never before on a field of battle had so many Highlanders been killed by so few Lowlanders with such little reward. You'd think they were flying Spitfires. Let me give you a bit of context in a complex situation. Donald wasn't the first Lord of the Isles. The first one was Somerled. He'd been King of the Isles, re Inchugall. He'd held the Hebrides in the orbit of Norway all the way across the North Sea. And then, in the 1263 Treaty of Perth, Magnus VI of Norway signed the Hebrides over to Alexander III, King of Scots. But just 3 years later, Alexander III died, throwing us into the Wars of Independence with Edward of England, Edward Longshanks. In that whole debacle, the MacDougals had supported the wrong side, but the Campbells and the MacDonalds had backed Robert the Bruce, and the MacDonalds emerged not as kings, but as lords of the Isles. Just a generation later, the short-lived Bruce dynasty gave way to Robert III, the first Stuart king. With numerous children, legitimate and illegitimate, the Stuart grip and control spread, and Ross-shire was the buffer between Stuart dominance and the Lord of the Isles. Now, James I was king, but he'd been languishing as a hostage in England for 5 years already, with his uncle, Robert Duke of Albany, as regent, and the Albany Stuarts making no effort to gain his release. Multi-layered negotiations have been going on between the hostage king James I and the Albany Stuarts, between the Albany Stuarts and the Lords of the Isles, and of course between the Lord of the Isles and Henry IV of England. It was enough to make an EU negotiator's head spin. In this video here, I point out how 50 years later, the then Lord of the Isles agreed the Treaty of Westminster-Tornish with a later King of England. A pact in which the Lord of the Isles would attack the King of Scots from the north and Edward IV of England from the south. It was agreed in the same castle from which today's protagonist set off. There are those who would say that the Battle of Harlaw was fought here for exactly the same reasons as that Treaty of Westminster-Tornish. Folk like history to be neat and tidy, don't they? Black Stetsons and white ones. McDonald's are good and Campbell's are bad, and my clan couldn't possibly have done anything wrong. Nothing's ever that clear, is it? Now, I love to see your comments in the videos in the comment section below. I'll be honest, they're starting to get more numerous than I can cope with answering every one of them, but I do read them and appreciate them. But sometimes I worry that we look at conflicts very two-dimensionally. Tell me what you think. I see people from the wider Scottish diaspora confusing British with English and clan with country. And let's be honest, blame with analysis. I often see them and some of us home-based Scots blaming the English for all Scotland's woes, whilst yet others make the ludicrous claim that everything in the British garden's rosy. Nothing's ever that simple. You can believe in Scotland, but still see our own failings. You can believe in the UK, yet face the fact that sleeping with an elephant means you'll probably be crushed. You can feel a sense of belonging without being stuck in the past. Now, I don't know whether to suggest a video about that later Lord of the Isles hatching an alliance against the Stuart king, or one about where the Stuart dynasty came from in the first place. As I say, life's complicated. Hamid Dawkins could be Lama alive. Cheerio and Drasta.